Brazil won, Morocco won, and I always say the World Cup hasn't truly started until we see that yellow shirt of Brazil. But they didn't exactly give us a masterclass to enjoy. But what we did see was a fascinating tactical battle. So this is of course the first game of the tournament that we have covered on the channel so far. Apologies for that, I've been on holiday for the last 9 days, but it's not the first match that I've watched. And what we saw, particularly, right at the start of this game, was something that we have seen in other games so far this summer. And that is fast starts from one team. And in this match, it was Morocco. Morocco came absolutely flying out of the traps and were brilliant. I actually had Morocco down to win this game before kickoff. They were my favourites coming into the match. And they started so incredibly well. They're so quick on the ball, so sharp. The technical level on display from the Moroccans was absolutely fantastic, and it comes from being able to build out from the back. The second that you can play short in the first phase, you can get players on the ball, you can start to control the game, and the players very quickly get their first touch at the tournament, they get their nerves out of the way and they start to feel confident. The reason why they were able to play out from the back with relative success was because the Brazilian press wasn't exactly perfect. So what we often saw was Thiago and Vinicius actually often jumping into a front two, especially on Moroccan goal kicks. And Paqueta, playing in the 10, would actually go wider on the left-hand side, almost becoming a left-sided midfielder. And what Brazil are trying to do is reduce the amount of defensive running that Vinicius has to do, which makes sense. The problem for Brazil was, sort of positionally, they looked okay. The structure makes sense. Guimaraes in midfield is able to jump higher when needed. But there was just a lack of intensity. There was a lack of sharpness from the Brazilian high press. They didn't really ever look fully committed to pressing. And we all know how it goes. If you press but don't fully commit, quite often you're going to be caught short somewhere. And that's exactly what we saw for Brazil in this game. We also, though, have to give a lot of credit, and I mean a lot of credit, to the Moroccans. I think Bouhaddi in particular was absolutely incredible in this game. I did a video on the AJ Analysis channel before the tournament talking about why he is a player that Manchester United should be watching this summer. And I think we all saw in this game just how brilliant he was. And he was really a key part of the fast start. So yes, Morocco were able to play out from the back, but for it to really be considered as a fast, scintillating start, they have to do something a little bit higher up the pitch as well. And I certainly think they did that. They quite quickly settled into their rhythm, and their shape became quite obvious quite early on. What we often saw was the two fullbacks playing a big part, really, in everything that Morocco were trying to do in this game. Two very good players, Mazraoui and Hakimi. These are two players that you will recognise, you'll be very familiar with them. What we saw from Hakimi on the right was often a much higher starting position, so he would venture forward up here and Brahim Diaz would come a little bit more central, whilst Mazraoui on the other side would actually play a little bit deeper and is almost at times going to tuck in as an extra centre-back, although we'll come back to this. But this is sort of the initial base for Morocco. This is the shape that they are creating. So they've got the three players across the back, meaning that they can outnumber Thiago and Vinicius quite comfortably. But also they've got plenty of numbers in the middle of the pitch, the likes of Unahi, Bouhaddi, Diaz in the centre. They really outnumbered Brazil in these areas. And when you've got Casemiro as one of those Brazilian players, there's a lack of mobility at the hub of this Brazilian team, which allowed Morocco to move the ball forward. And again, I think the midfielders were fantastic. But I have to keep coming back to the fullbacks. I think Mazraoui and Hakimi, their tactical roles were so important in this game. Because, even Mazraoui started deeper. They were both given that license to push further forward. And for Brazil, a lot of the time, it was overwhelming the way that these players arrived into the space. Down the right-hand side, you've got Hakimi, who is fantastic. We've all seen it for PSG over the past 2 years. The way that he runs forward, it's terrifying, right? It's an absolute joke. But what I loved was the dynamic that he had with Diaz. Because Brahim Diaz is a technical player. When he picks up the ball, he's cute with his first touch. And what he does is he draws people towards him. He draws the presence of defenders. He makes these people come towards him. And then you've got Hakimi, who does the opposite. So Diaz sort of comes towards the ball, gets touches and drags defenders out. And then Hakimi just flies into the space that has been created. And that can be on the overlap, which I enjoy. I think Hakimi is great at doing that. But also the underlap as well. I'll put a stat down here. You'll be able to see how many shots Hakimi had in this game, particularly in the first half. He just kept going. He kept arriving into the space. He kept having shots because he was this underlapping threat. And of course, Vinicius Jr. on the left wing, I actually think he worked quite hard in this game, but he's not going to track Hakimi all the way over here. Paqueta was a little bit sort of tied up in other roles at the time. Hakimi was a massive threat, but I think Mazraoui on the left-hand side was a very important player as well for Morocco. Now, Mazraoui is a right-footed left-back. in this instance. So he's sort of a wrong-footed player. But I think Morocco worked with this really well, to be honest. So he's right-footed, which means his first touch often wants to come inside. And Mazraoui is another one of these Moroccan players that is very comfortable on the ball. He's never in a rush. He's never panicked. He's very calm, of course, an experienced player. He's played at the highest level for so long now. But because he's right-footed, his first touch is taking him inside. And what it's sort of opening up is passes inside the pitch like this. Because he's right-footed. You know, if he was left-footed, he'd be passing over here a lot. But because he was right-footed, he was allowing Morocco this access back into the middle of the pitch. And I think it's something that he did very well. There were also moments where, you know, Morocco would have the ball on the left-hand side. Let's just clear this. Morocco would have the ball on the left-hand side. Brazil would sort of get over. But because you've got Mazraoui right-footed, you can come back inside and access the far side of the pitch. And Brazil were just so sloppy in the first half at getting their numbers sort of back behind the ball, tucked in to prevent that far side play. And this made Morocco really dangerous. And then if we come back to a left-hand side, Mazraoui's underlapping runs, but also the desire for these two to take the ball on and just go. I mean, how many fouls did Brazil make in the first 5 minutes of this match? Because the Moroccans were picking the ball up and they were taking on the player right in front of them. And we talk so much about tactics and structures and shapes and things like that. But when you've got players that are going to take the ball and going to dribble and going to beat a man, taking a man out of the game, they break tactics almost. You know, so Rafinha, for example, might be man-to-man with Mazraoui. But if Mazraoui can beat him, Rafinha's out of the game and now Brazil have got a bit of a problem. And these poor Brazilian midfielders had so much ground to cover. And Morocco were excellent. But eventually, Brazil did come back into it. Now, Brazil were able to come back into this game because they're Brazil. They've got a lot of quality on display, but also because tactically they threw up a little bit of a surprise, particularly as we went into the second half. So when we look at this Brazil team, we expect them to build up with a double pivot. We were anticipating, we discussed this before the tournament, that Casemiro and Guimaraes would often play as a midfield two alongside each other and almost be a little bit too flat at times. That was a concern I had for them. And something that we really emphasised in our preview was that they're going to have to stagger. There are going to have to be moments where one of them goes and plays a little bit higher and you sort of stagger your midfielders like this. You almost get these sort of zigzag lines between your midfielders. And that's what we saw from Brazil. You can see it here. This is very much a midfield three. This isn't a double pivot. This is one midfielder at the base with the two staggered central midfielders then in front of them. So this was a little bit of a surprise from this Brazil squad. Was it particularly intentional? I don't know. It's not something that we've seen a load of from them in the build-up to the tournament, which was perhaps why it didn't have the natural flow in the first half of the game. But I also think one of their problems was just they were poor at the start, right? Brazil were poor. That's one of the reasons why they were slow. They were failing basics, real basics, technical basics, simple 4-yard passes to the player to your right, and they were sticking it into the first Moroccan player. So that's why Brazil had so many problems early on in the game. The other reason why they found it a little bit difficult initially was because Morocco was such a well-drilled defensive side, and they were sort of set up in this almost 4-2-2 shape off the ball. You could also call it a 4-2-4 at times. But what they were really doing, Morocco, was setting this trap in the middle of the pitch here. So people will argue Morocco in open play are a little bit too passive, but I think they can get away with it, right? When Gabriel's got the ball at the back, he's not really a problem. There isn't a need to go sprinting after him. Why not just protect his space in behind you? And what Morocco would do was recognise the stagger of the Brazilian midfield. And anytime the ball would come in, so let's say from Casemiro into Guimaraes, well then Bouhaddi would jump. And again, he was absolutely incredible in this game. And Morocco almost set these traps in the middle of the pitch. They would set the trap, the ball would come in, they win the ball and then look to transition. And they got so much technical quality, a lot of good physical runners off the ball as well. So Morocco defensively were really well set up there. As we move a little bit higher, again, initially, Brazil sort of showed ideas and principles which could threaten, but initially it didn't work. Don't worry, we'll come to the positive for Brazil shortly, because they did end up, I think, playing quite well. But first of all, we need to cover what wasn't working so well. And, you know, Brazil was trying really to overload one side of the pitch, this left-hand side, which again, we spoke about before the tournament. We thought this might happen. Lots of players for Brazil getting really close together, which I love to watch. I think it's something that a Brazilian team should do, because when you get players close together like this, you see the link up, you see the chemistry, you see the flair, the trickery, the moments of brilliance, and they've got so many players capable of producing that. But again, in the first half, it just didn't work. And I felt almost that Brazil had too many players pushed high, so they were vulnerable to the transition. And on the ball, they weren't really getting much upside because they almost became a little bit in each other's way, really. Now, in the second half, the approach from Brazil changed. It was a very slight tweak to their structure and the way that they were playing, but I think it made them much better going forward. And in the second half, I think Brazil were the better team. So the first half for me was all about Morocco. I think they were the side really entertaining us. The second half, I think Brazil were the better side. They looked more on top, more in control, and more dangerous, in my opinion. And the change they made actually came at the back in the defence. Not in terms of personnel, the back four stayed exactly the same, but the positioning of the back four, and in particular the fullbacks, changed. So what we saw in the first half was Santos in particular on the left getting forward, creating these overloads, but almost blocking each other a little bit. What we saw in the second half was the fullbacks for Brazil holding really, really deep positions. You can see here, those fullbacks aren't far away from their centre-backs at all, and they're certainly not far away from their central midfielder, which stretches Morocco, or it certainly gives them a question that they've got to answer. When the Brazilian defenders have now got the ball, they're that much deeper that if Morocco want to jump and be aggressive, the distances for a player here to now jump are much larger than what they were before. So what we're going to do here is Santos picks the ball up deeper than before and he draws Diaz out. What has now happened is the gap between the Moroccan winger and the Moroccan fullback has now massively increased. There's a much bigger gap between the two of them. So in the first half, Santos might have been up here and Diaz would have been defending over here, quite close to Hakimi. But because the fullbacks now go deeper and pick up the ball, Diaz is forced to jump, and now you can see, watch this line stretch. The line stretches, the distances increase between the Moroccan defensive players. So this was quite clever from Ancelotti. By dropping his fullbacks deeper, he created more space for the forwards. You also now get much easier access as well. Because the space is that much bigger, the pass is easier to play, but also Vinicius Jr. now has room. He can pick up the ball, he can turn. And now we're talking about one of the most dangerous players in football. Right, Vinicius Jr. picking the ball up 1 versus 1, going at Hakimi. I mean, it's a fantastic battle. I really enjoyed this. But this is what Brazil won. I said sort of during the second half. If you're Brazil, you now feel that you've got a chance. And the reason for that is because Vinicius and Rafinha, two of the best players in this Brazil team, are now getting a lot of touches. Because we did see the same thing down the right. The deeper fullback, drawing the winger, and then the straight ball down the line for Rafinha, for Vinicius. And now Brazil looked much better because they were accessing their wingers, and their wingers are good. The problem for them was that the Moroccan fullbacks are also very good, and this Moroccan side is very well drilled. But I think in the second half, we saw more of a blueprint that can work for Brazil. They don't necessarily need to go and overload those attacking positions. Someone like Vinicius is so good. Leave him alone. He doesn't always need sort of 3 runners around him. Sometimes leave him to go at a defender. Because not many fullbacks in this competition will be as good as what Hakimi is. Vinicius will have much more luck as the tournament grows. The other change that I liked was when we saw Rafinha move inside, almost into this sort of left 10 position. I think that made Brazil look dangerous as well, because they still had plenty of wide threat on the two sides, but also with the sort of staggered midfield, they had these players that could run into the channels now, with both Guimaraes and Rafinha making these runs. And of course, Guimaraes is right-footed on this side, and Rafinha is left-footed on this side, so now they can play the early deliveries. I did feel that they lacked something up front. Thiago, for me, was a bit of a weird decision to start the game. He's obviously scored a lot of goals for Brentford this season, but he's not the player that I would have gone for, and I don't think he played very well. But I certainly think Brazil sort of grew into the game, and that's why I think a draw was a fair result. So did I watch this game and think either side is now favourites for the tournament? No, to be honest, neither of them really absolutely amazed me and blew my mind with their performance, but I think both sides proved that they will be a problem, and if they make it to the knockouts, which they probably will, the group should be quite straightforward for them, they can beat anyone on their day because they've both got so much quality. This Moroccan team is one to watch. I think they're the team that people will want to avoid in the knockouts. There's some serious quality there, in the fullback positions, in the midfield, but the front line, there's a lot of quality there as well. I think it's a really good Moroccan side. For Brazil, I think Ancelotti needs to find the balance. He did that much better in the second half. And I think moving forward, there will be tweaks to that starting 11. It didn't work. I'd be a little bit surprised if Casemiro starts the next one. And the same for Thiago up front. Maybe even Paqueta. Because none of them were good enough for Brazil. But they still proved on a night where they weren't amazing, they still managed to draw with a team ranked in the top 10 in Morocco. So Brazil are dangerous this tournament, and so are Morocco. They're two fantastic sides, which concludes our coverage, or our first match coverage of the tournament. But don't worry, there's going to be plenty more videos coming soon. Hopefully in the future we actually get a winner that we can talk about. But I really enjoyed this game. When it was a draw, I sort of contemplated whether or not I should do a video, but I just love the World Cup so much. There's been a lot of talk coming into the tournament, a lot of outside pressure and scrutiny, but ultimately once the football starts, the good teams are on the pitch. It's enjoyable, right? I think some of the matches have been brilliant so far, and this one really entertained me. I really enjoyed it, so that's why I wanted to cover it for today. Let me know which match you would like to see next in the comments down below. But apart from that, we are now finished for today, so thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.